Welcome, everybody. It's great to be here for a conversation about responsible supply chains. I am joined by an esteemed panel of some of the great supply chain thinkers I've met in my life. Reggie Ecclissato, the Chief Supply Chain Officer of Unilever, Dave Clark, CEO of Flexport, and finally, Anne-Laure Descours, Chief Sourcing Officer of Puma. Reggie, if I could go to you first, just a little quick introduction about yourself, your role, Unilever, and just to the highest level, what do you think about responsible supply chains?
Well, first, thanks for the invitation, Kevin. I'm Reggie Ecclissato. I lead supply chain for Unilever over 32 years in the company. We are a CPG company. We have many brands, and we operate in close to 191 countries around the world. We sell brands, we sell credibility to our consumers, and responsible supply chain is in the core of everything that we do in the company. We usually say that credibility is something that it takes years to build, seconds to lose, and it's very difficult to repair. This is core for us.
It's a great observation. I think we should all live by that one. Dave, can I come to you next as the CEO of Flexport and an old CEO of Amazon Consumer who knows his way around supply chain?
Sure. I'm Dave Clark. After 23 years at Amazon, I joined Flexport, which is a supply chain technology company really focused on making global trade easy for everyone and helping people on a single pane of glass get their goods from manufacturer to customer store or door. And that's our mission, and that's the path we're on. And when you think about it, supply chain is really at the intersection of some of the most important ESG initiatives in the world, whether it be environmental, planetary resources, labor, and the care of humans around the world. I think there are very few things that have more of the world population engaged than the supply chain industry. And so the impact that leaders in this space have on humans around the world and on the planet we occupy is immense. And one of the things I love about being in this profession is how seriously the leadership and the people who participate in events like this at Zero100 take that responsibility and ownership in the work they do every day.
I've always believed supply chain saves the world. And when you think of the big picture of what ESG means, there's a lot to it. Anne-Laure, can I come to you now? Tell me a little bit about yourself, please.
Well, I'm a newcomer to Zero100. I lead the sourcing and sustainability for Puma for now a few years. I've been based in Hong Kong for 29 years, so Asia has been my world and China has been my world for a long time. While responsible sourcing, I think the apparel and footwear industry have been very exposed to how we operate for many years. So it's been part of the conversation for a long time. Having said that, it's been easier said than done. And I think the biggest transformation we've seen in responsible sourcing the last few years is the necessity to engage with suppliers and to really work in collaboration and really share values and share commitment with them and working for long term and not jumping from one to another, which was the case in the apparel business for many years. And I think there's been a big transformation. Our industry was very hit by NGOs and activists and consumers for quite some time. So we learned the lesson very early that we had to handle it responsibly. But how much you translate that into real action has been something quite instrumental the last few years. So
I think that's part of the reason we're all here for this session and Zero100 in general. And I think your experience on the apparel side, which you and I have shared some conversations around this, leads me to the first question I'd like to have each of us think a little bit about, which is, what's the most important thing you can avoid to try to make sure you maintain trust, build trust, and avoid eroding it? Reggie, I'll come to you first if you don't mind. How do you think about that?
Yeah, I would start saying the whole walking the talk. It's extremely important. Providing full transparency of the value chain to consumers is something that many industries, many companies, they have invested quite a lot. We have invested quite a lot to be able to provide this transparency. And consumers, they want to understand exactly what you do and how you do it, from whom you are buying, what the conditions that we are procuring your materials, the way that you are treating your employees, your third parties, and the whole ecosystem. If you look at everything related to climate, to social, and to nature, is something that we are 100% exposed to. Whatever you do, it's going to be public. And you need to be absolutely sure that you are walking the talk. One thing to me that has been very important over the last years is the role of technology and how technology is helping us to be able to remain truthful to your purpose and the things that you do it. Like, for instance, we have palm oil. Palm oil is the main agriculture material that we procure from Southeast Asia. And the only way to really be absolutely sure that we source from deforestation-free areas was to start monitoring that. And the only way to do it was through technology. And we have a partnership with Google, with the Descartes Lab, and many other tech companies.
Yeah, I think that transparency and the trust, which is the beginning of the question, is about customers and consumers. I think from the apparel side, this question of where are we getting our materials, where are we getting our product, has been hot. How do you think about what to avoid, and then what tools have you got for avoiding things that will erode trust?
I don't think you can avoid question. I think you have to accept the question and try to answer them the best way you can. I couldn't agree more to what was just said, but one thing I want to add here as well is, in this hope to get transparency and traceability, is what is the impact for your suppliers? We take it sometimes from a very Western approach, and as much as want that to happen in the supply chain, you have to recognize the local needs and the local obstacle you're dealing with. So for me, it goes through education and really, to your point, walking the talk, but making sure that it comes from the top and the bottom. Everybody in your organization get the meaning of that. Because if you haven't educated your own people why you're doing it, for what purpose you're doing it, and how it's impacting your suppliers, and how is this benefit for them, then it's not going to happen. It's going to be very superficial, but it's not going to happen. And then you get the NGOs coming on the activists, and you're not walking the talk, and you're doing greenwashing. So to me, education comes first, making the things very visible and explain the benefits. And again, going back to trust, you have to make sure that part of your profit is being shared. If you don't give back some of your profit to your suppliers, to the supply chain, there is no way they're going to do it. No way. So you have to be very honest to yourself and to the people you work with. Say, this is where we're going. How can we get there together? This togetherness for me is absolutely critical. And I think in the apparel industry, that collaboration piece has been at the center of many things we've been doing.
I'm interested in lessons learned around tech. Reggie, you talked about the tech solve in the palm oil question. What kind of solves, when you think of tech, are possible in terms of engaging with the supply base and walking the talk?
Well, I think tying back to the last question, I think over the last decade or so, you've seen an emergence of a couple things. One, companies viewing their ownership moving past geographic borders and organizational walls, and the emergence of supply chain moving from simply more of a procurement entity into more of a strategic partner in the boardroom. And that's coming because you can't just have a supplier anymore. You can't say, oh, that's my supplier. Nobody cares about that anymore. Like you need to have transparency, visibility, and ability to understand what's happening with your suppliers and to have control over the process, or at least input on the process as it comes through your supply base. And that's a big shift. And supply chain leaders are at the center of that now. And the profession has changed a lot as a result. Technology, I think, is the enabler of that over the long term. In the short term, it's great leaders and people on the ground and, NGOs and other people who are seeing and engaging. But the longer term, I think, comes to a lot of technical initiatives that give you more visibility into manufacturing, into raw material sourcing and tracking, and visibility on what's happening on the ground in countries where farming or harvesting or whatever is happening, and then the overall transparency and movement of goods. So I think all those things are in play now. And when you look at what AI and sensor fusion and technology can bring to bear, I think over the next decade, it's really going to be amazing how deep you're going to be able to see, I believe, into the manufacturing process and supply chain. And that's part of our role in the company I'm at now, is trying to help companies who don't have the technical capabilities to do that, to help bridge the gap for them into the sort of next generation of tech.
The tech as enabler piece of this puzzle is intriguing because everybody that we're all working with is working pretty hard on getting their hands around tech just to do the work of keeping up with the volatility in the markets. You start thinking about responsible supply chains, and I think this trust and transparency and working with suppliers in a shared fashion is clearly a step in the right direction. But I'm going to throw something at you, which is the Scope 3 carbon question, where the complexity of the science and the interconnectedness of, as you said, Dave, I can't just say, hey, that's my supplier. Well, that's right, it's your supplier. Any thoughts about how, as supply chain leaders accountable for all these relationships, something like Scope 3 can be shrunk down as a problem that isn't just solving everything in the universe and turned into, here's something I know we can do, walk the talk, and here's something that we can share together. What do you think, Anne-Laure?
Well, we started to work with the suppliers on that level, working on the first easy part, I would say, is renewable energy. Okay, how do you engage with the suppliers to help them or to work together into renewable energy to reduce your carbon footprint or renewable water? There are multiple programs, there are multiple initiatives through the industry summit. We're working through that at the moment to try building a consensus among the industry. What is it we're going to ask the suppliers? Because if we come to a vendor with certain expectations and another brand come with another expectation, then it creates a lot of confusion. So this collaboration, this alignment between us is absolutely critical to make sure that along the chain, everybody works toward the same rules, the same standard, the same vision. Then, we've been engaging a lot with different organizations. We just actually hosted a science-based targets forum with our suppliers, defining what is it we're looking at and how we can collaborate and share best practices between suppliers. Those who are more advanced, how can they share and what can they share with the others so we can learn from each other. This learning piece is actually at the moment, as we are piloting and developing that, we really need that openness to really learn, because otherwise we're never going to get there. Because the investment you have to do in terms of CapEx is quite significant.
For renewables.
For everything, it's quite significant. So if you don't have a business plan with them and say, this is where we're going to get together in the next 5 years, it's hard for them to start building these investments.
Reggie, I have to come to you on this.
I agree with 100% what you said. And it's something that you cannot do by yourself only. You need to have other players in the industry. You need to have industry associations. You need to have the government with regulations. You need NGOs and so forth. I think it's orchestrated movement that really needs to happen. The complexity is huge. I think all of us, we work with thousands of suppliers and with a very diverse geographical footprint. And it's not something that's simple at all. But I believe we need to get traction on reducing carbon footprints. That's, to me, the most important thing. But I agree 100% with you. And it's great to see that the apparel industry is doing that. And I think we need more industries to be able to do it.
One thing I want to add here is it's also challenging because each government in each country may have different regulations and different propositions. Absolutely. And one solution that might be applicable for Bangladesh might not be applicable for Vietnam or might not be applicable for China. And this is adding to the complexity of making this program viable. So for me, we are more on the stage where we are learning and really bringing our heads together to trying to find the way and shape direction before really acting, because this making sense moment is critical. Otherwise, you start doing something and then you realize this is just nonsense. So you have to have this moment of collective actions where we really figure out what is it we can do and we want to do.
That's important, is that when you look at carbon or climate change, there is another element that is extremely important to make it sustainable. It's related to social. We talk quite a lot about living wage, but if you don't really have, I would say, a more structured proposal to really get living wage implemented in many parts of the world, I mean, this is not sustainable. I mean, it's difficult to, when you talk about climate, you need to talk about social. And for us, in our station, you need to talk about nature as well. They need to come fully integrated.
Part of the challenge I think you get here is that the intentions tend to be very central and the actions are very local. And so, you have a very centralized view of how the world should work. Tends to be a very Western vision of how the world should work. And then the local execution of that vision is, can be hyper local, in fact, of infrastructure availability, social, what is life like in a region? What does water conservation look like? And things are in very different statuses in different parts of the world. And we tend to measure them by one bar in a central way, but execution happens very locally. And I think this idea of how do you get a more, how do you get a steady view of what success is, I think is incredibly important and is very daunting, I think, to get consensus around and to make progress towards.
It's a systems issue. So environmental and social do touch each other, and these pieces all end up being a giant whack-a-mole game. And I feel like this whole sustainability thing is a massive whack-a-mole game. What strikes each of you, I guess, as the biggest traps you're aware of, having wrestled with this, that others could benefit from having flagged for them?
For me, it's a work in progress. The one thing I would say that might be a trap is how do you get the consumer understand the journey we are at, especially the Gen Z consumer? Because on one hand, and I have Gen Z kids, they're very much into this conversation and they basically blame us for screwing up the planet and now they want us to fix the planet, but at the same time, their behavior might not fix the planet. So how do you bring that education on the consumer level? For me, it is probably the most challenging parts, because at the back we do a lot. We all committed, all of us. We really want things to be done in a better way. And to me, that's the biggest challenge I see today is how do you bring a bridge between what we do, what they want, and what needs to be done.
There's a disconnect between words and action. There'd be lots of conversation around this, but people will love to go buy a $5 dress off of Wish, or many of the fast fashion brands that are very, very low cost, that are the highest demand products there are, and some of the fastest growing brands and products there are. So if there is a trap, maybe it's a long arc of change for quality of life, for regenerative resourcing in countries, for supply. These are long arcs of change that you need a lot of patience and engagement with over a long time, that we need to make sure we stick to and don't get hyperbolic about intentions. There's some big innovation that I think needs to happen that'll take step functions, but most of that exists in the really hard problems, physics problems like flight and battery life and those kind of things that you need to electrify some of the most carbon intensive transports on the planet. And that's just going to take time.
Reggie, I know you guys at Unilever have spent a lot of time leading on this, but presumably also as a family of great consumer brands. What do you think about the consumer? Will we get to the point where the consumer appreciates and doesn't just support you at the brand level, but really at the purchase level and at the behavioral level on an ongoing basis?
Yeah, a couple of things. One is that if we see it, what you call brands with purpose, they grow faster. And we have proven that. Our brands like Dove, Ben & Jerry's, and many other brands, that they have a very strong purpose, but also they deliver functional benefits to consumers. Consumers, they are willing to pay for that, and there is value. That's the first thing. The second one is that I agree with Dave. I think this is a long journey that you need to commit, you need to invest, and so forth. Technology will come and so forth. I think you need to always be prepared to be criticized for the things that you still don't do it, instead of the things that you really do well. And you need to have resilience during this journey. But the vast majority of consumers, they say, I'm not willing to pay for you to do the right things. You should do the right things. I think the whole education that Anne mentioned is extremely important as well, to keep educating consumers about those things.
Let me ask you what I think of as a bit of a provocative question, which is, are the NGOs doing more good or harm right now with engaging the consumer? I worry sometimes about green hushing moment. Do you think the NGOs are more good or bad at this point in the evolution of this movement?
Do any NGOs watch this podcast?
I think it's good to have them. They need to be part of the conversation. To me, it's like the regulation. I think this is pushing. And to your point, we're never going to be celebrated for the right thing we do. We're going to be blamed for whatever we don't do. We need to accept that. The one thing which I find is interesting on sustainability, for the past many years, it was very much an expert conversation. Only experts were talking about sustainability. What happened the last few years is that this has to move to the business people. And basically, when you do business, you have to become not an expert, but you have to be knowledgeable on sustainability, being supported by experts. So moving away from this very expert silo conversation, basically having a top-down looking and you say, you need to do that, into now, it's embedded in every part of the business we do, from the top to the bottom. Everybody has a share to play on sustainability. He's the biggest change. And that's why for the NGO, it's probably a little bit more a different conversation, because they're not talking among each other anymore. They have to open the conversation to people like you, like us around here, who have much more knowledge on this topic and can really start to have valuable conversations. So I see the benefit of NGO. At times I fight with them because we may disagree, but at least there is a debate, and I think the debate is helping everybody. So I kind of welcome them.
Yeah, and I agree. I think this whole learning from each other is something that happens. But also, I think they play an important role helping as well with the relationship with governments and helping us to remain true to ourselves. There is a huge value in working with NGOs for those things. And sometimes, of course, you have issues and you learn from them, they learn from us, and we have tough conversations, and sometimes we agree to disagree.
That happens internally too,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
So I think we all have come to expect that with size comes responsibility, right? And I think NGOs play a role in that. It's also hard to talk about the abstract. Just like people, there are extremes on any kind of sides by the other. The one that worries me more, frankly, is where you have very, very large sums of money, like massive retirement funds and pension funds, placed in very blanket systems with rule sets for investment that are set by a very small number of people. The intention's correct, placing investments with certain criteria on them, but investing too far out into the future instead of helping invest in the curve between here and there. Something that makes sure we don't fall into, because so much money now is institutional money and growing into that ESG realm that you could miss an opportunity to make great progress in the next decade while trying to solve some magical problem 20 years out.
Yeah, that's a great observation about a specific trap that's worth thinking. But I think the conversation, regardless of who's driving it, NGOs or large companies and customers themselves, it's a conversation that's not going to stop. We're about to wrap here. I want to see if you feel like offering any final thoughts about responsible supply chains.
It's just the way of life now, right? I mean, I don't think you can be in the supply chain anymore without waking up and thinking about your impact on people and the planet. It's just, that's a shift in the 25 years or so that I've been in the business. That's like, it's just a fundamental shift that like, it's a core of what I wake up thinking about every day. And, we have a 10-year-old company that's really come into its own in the last 5 years. And we already have a massive investment in sustainability and engagement with the humanitarian relief around the world. And that would not have happened a decade ago, right? That's a transition to where a startup company growing really fast, like Flexport, is heavily engaged in sustainability, CO2 tracking, carbon reduction, and humanitarian relief. I don't think would have been the case. That's not where we would have invested time and resources, but it's because it's not an adjunct to the business anymore. It is the business today.
Right. It's a great point. And clearly, here we are, Zero100 talking about it all day.
Definitely is the way of doing business. Don't believe that there is any other way if you don't really take sustainability at the heart of your operations. I think we need to accelerate the pace because this is becoming more table stakes and is something that consumers are starting to demand. And with the full transparency of everything that you do, it's becoming more and more important.
I think this collaboration principle is absolutely key. And I think the only way for us to get to a better way of doing our product will go through this collaboration, this share of innovations and best practices, and really be much more open. Yes, we have limit because of antitrust and different things that do limit us in the way we collaborate, but there is no other way. I think the only way is we need to do it together. We are at different speed when it comes from Europe. Expectations are very high, regulations are becoming very strict. The US is getting there, but the rest of the world is not there yet. It doesn't matter for us as a brand. We're going to have to make it happen also in Brazil, like we make it in South Africa or in China. But that piece of collaboration, of openness, and being humble that it's a journey, it's a tough journey. Thank goodness technology is helping us right now, which is fantastic because that is accelerating for us the way we can transform. But it's going to really be centered around collaboration and be open and transparent.
What a perfect closing point. Great stuff, you guys. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For a list of reports and resources on how our members are using tech for traceability initiatives, be sure to check out our show notes. This episode of Radical Reinvention was produced by Brian Egan, Ursula Kahn, Mike Silverman, Diane Hope, Nick Heineman, Catherine Perry, and me, Victoria Marin. Duda Rodriguez edited this episode, and Ko Takasugi Chernovin is our sound engineer and also composed our theme music. To find out more about Zero100 and to check out our content library, go to zero100.com. If you're interested in joining our community of contributors, send us a note at hello@zero100.com.